Video, we're going to give a brief overview of VPNs. Now, VPNs stands for Virtual Private Network. And as the name implies, it allows you to network two sites together virtually, i.e. without having a leased line network between the two sites. Now, on an actual private network, you lease the line from the provider, and you control every device that's on that leased line network. Or, in the case of MPLS or Frame Relay, all the devices that your data goes through are owned by the carrier or some other trusted third party. In other words, you don't have to worry about the integrity or the security of your data on an actual leased line private network. And so as a result, data security and encryption really is kind of secondary in most cases. VPNs allow you to basically use the internet as a WAN, but without all that messy data interception and data loss and all the wonderful things that can happen when you just send data in clear text across the internet. Now you might be asking yourself, how do VPNs ensure that the bad guys don't get all my data? Well, VPNs ensure data confidentiality through three methods. Number one is authentication. Your VPN devices make sure that the data that's being sent to it, encrypted of course, is coming from a trusted peer and not just some random person out on the internet throwing encrypted traffic at you hoping that something sticks. The second method is anti-replay. Anti-replay stops someone from just grabbing a whole bunch of these encrypted packets off the network and then 20 minutes or 30 minutes later sending those same packets to your VPN device, thereby causing data corruption or data loss or any number of nasty things when you get multiple copies of the same data arriving well outside the windows. And the third is data integrity, and basically that validates that the packet that was sent is the packet that was received. Obviously, Ethernet and IP and TCP handle a lot of the data integrity functions as well, but you also want to make sure that no one has tampered with the encrypted data packet, if you will, between the two VPN endpoints. Now again, as this is a very brief overview of VPNs, and in fact, in the ICND2 you don't really get into VPNs all that much, this is a very simple VPN setup. Let's say you have two networks that are remote from one another, and you wish to network them together. But let's say you're a small company and you can't afford a DS3 to go from Portland, Oregon to Miami, Florida. However, each of these offices do have their own local internet connection, obviously, so VPNs allow you to leverage that. Essentially, you would install a VPN appliance in each office, connect it to the internet, and to your internal networks. Now, since this is a Cisco course, of course, we will recommend that this is a Cisco router or a Cisco ASA, but in reality, there are a multitude of devices out there that can do VPN encryption, some running as virtual machines using Linux or OpenBSD, and the encryption technologies are the same. You don't get any special encryption technologies by going with Cisco or Juniper or some other big name brand. Now, once you've installed your VPN appliances, whatever they may be, you configure a secure tunnel between the two devices. And anything that goes through this tunnel is encrypted by virtue of the fact that when the data leaves the network here on the left, it's encapsulated and secured when it hits this VPN device. It's then sent across the internet through this virtual tunnel here, and it's de-encapsulated or decrypted on the remote end, at which point the data is just dropped onto the local network, just like if this were an actual DS3 or a T1 or some other connection method. Now, of course, this is just one example. You have a corporate network here on the left, and of course, you can use the example we just gave and connect to a branch site, no problem whatsoever. However, with this same device, you could also set up a filtered VPN connection and connect to a business partner, for example. Let's say you create shirts and you want to connect securely to your distribution partner to make sure that the data you send them isn't intercepted or decrypted as it goes through the internet. You can give them access to a portion of your network, and they can give access to a portion of their network. And of course, in the same device, you can also support Mr. Telecommuter here. Again, if you're in a startup, you're probably traveling all over, and you carry your laptop out to the client side or at home, and you're working at 2 and 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, working day and night to try to get your business off the ground. With a properly configured VPN appliance, you can support all of these at the same time. You don't have to have multiple appliances to support these different connection scenarios. And that brings us to the end of our overview of VPNs. In this video, we're going to talk about VPN encryption. Now, as we mentioned in our overview, one of the core functions of VPNs are data integrity, and VPNs accomplish this by encrypting the data before it leaves the source workstation or the source network, so it can't be intercepted by a man in the middle and exploited for financial gain and glory. And if you've not dealt with security, man in the middle is not something that I made up. You can go Google for man in the middle, and that is a valid attack vector. If you are sending data across an insecure network, someone can sit in the middle of that network and just grab all of the data as it crosses the wire. Hence the need for VPNs if you truly want your data to be secure as it goes across the internet. Now, there are two major VPN encryption schemes that are used in modern VPNs, and we're going to talk about these in very general terms, but at least at this level of the CCNA, you don't get into how the protocols work very in depth. You just have to know the basic functions of a VPN, and of course, Google can help you with all of the gory technical details if you're so inclined to do so. The first encryption scheme is called IPsec, and this is short for IP security. IPsec is an open standard, and it's supported by nearly every VPN device out there. So again, this is not Cisco specific. If you have a Cisco device on one end and a Juniper on the other, and you're talking to a checkpoint at a third site, they'll all interoperate beautifully. The second encryption scheme is SSL, or Secure Sockets Layer. Now, these technologies accomplish the same ends, but by different means. IPsec is kind of a framework, which we'll get into here in just a little bit, whereas SSL still encrypts the data and still encrypts it just as strongly as IPsec, in my opinion. It just uses a radically different method to do so. So let's talk about IPsec. As I mentioned, IPsec is a framework that allows for different methods of encryption and authentication to be used inside that framework. Encryption and authentication, while they're somewhat related, they are actually two different functions of the protocol. You can mix and match different encryption and authentication schemes as technology changes or as business needs dictate. Again, let's say you're talking to a 15-year-old device and it only speaks a certain level of encryption. Well, if you're running a more modern device, you can actually speak that lower level of encryption to that one peer. And as new encryption technologies and new authentication technologies come out, vendors will upgrade their implementation of IPsec and allow you to take advantage of those enhanced protocols without having to completely redesign your VPN infrastructure. Encryption, at its most basic level, is really just a pair of mathematical formulae, and that allows for the secure encryption and decryption of data crossing an insecure network. Now, we won't go into all of the formula, and we can all be glad that we're not, because those formulas are incredibly long and incredibly complex, and unless you have a degree in cryptography or you've studied it for years, you probably won't understand them. I know I don't understand them. I just know that they work. In the same way that I don't understand 100% how my car engine works, but that still doesn't stop me from getting to work every morning. Now, at the heart of these two formulae is the session key, and in IPsec speak, it's sometimes called the pre-shared key. And as you might guess, the pre-shared key has to be the same on both ends. That's why it's pre-shared. You have to protect this session key very, very well, because if someone gets this session key, they can decrypt all of the traffic going through your VPN tunnels. And we certainly wouldn't want that to happen. So at a very high level, here's what happens with IPsec. You have a packet that leaves through the sending gateway. Now, the sending router or the sending VPN gateway takes the data and uses the session key in the encryption formula to encrypt the data. It then takes this encrypted data and encapsulates it inside a new IP header and an ESP header. ESP is not the extrasensory perception that you think it might be. That actually stands for Encrypted Security Payload. And that is how the sending and receiving router knows how much data is actually encrypted in here inside this ESP packet. Now, if you were to actually sniff this using Wireshark, you would not see the data inside this encrypted packet. You would just see it as being ESP data. And that is by design, obviously, because the encrypted payload inside this ESP packet is simply the original IP packet that came from this network over here. So once this packet is placed onto the internet then takes that and routes it over to the receiving side. The receiving router does the opposite of what the sending router does. It takes the session key and this encrypted packet, runs the packet through the decryption formula, and cracks open this packet that's encrypted inside the ESP packet, then drops it onto the network over here on the right. And dedicated appliances can do this several million times per second, so it's very, very fast, even though it looks like it's a lot of steps. Now we'll move on to SSL. SSL stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and if you've used the internet, if you've used any kind of secure site like Facebook or Twitter or any of those sites that use HTTPS, you know what SSL stands for. This encrypts data at a higher level in the OSI model. IPsec encrypts it at layers 3 and 4. SSL encrypts up there at layers 5 and 6, I believe. Again, it's not completely important for this exam, but you have to know that it encrypts the data at a higher level. It doesn't care about encrypting the data as it flows at the network layer. In Cisco land, the SSL client is called an AnyConnect client, and it runs on a user's workstation and uses the SSL protocol to connect them to a VPN device at your data center or at your home network. You can connect to many types of devices using AnyConnect, but most often you're going to connect to a device called an ASA or an Adaptive Security Appliance. And this takes the encrypted traffic from your workstation, de-encrypts it, and drops it onto the network that's configured on the other side of that ASA. And that, my friends, concludes our discussion on VPN encryption. Welcome into the VPN Lab.